Episode that you directed is airing this week. How did this opportunity come to fruition?
I expressed my interest and passion in it very early on, probably during the first season pilot time. And, they knew, and I, of course, shadowed a bunch of directors and did a bit of a directing program. And when all the sort of stars aligned, I, went in with my final sort of pitch or plea to direct an episode this season, and they supported it, and it worked really well. The producers of the show and the network all kind of, they had my back and they supported this passion of mine, and for that reason I was able to direct episode 14, and really a great gift. It has been one of the best experiences I've had so far on the show. And it's also something that I've been practicing for a very long time. It's something that I've wanted to do and didn't do it. It didn't do it with, I guess what I would say is I did it with purpose. I worked hard and I wanted to make sure that I knew what I was going to do. It was a sort of a thoughtful decision.
Yeah, you've directed a short film in the past. How has your experience working on 15 years later prepared you for this moment?
15 years later was my story. It was something that I wrote, and it was something that I put together with a band of people, and it was a much smaller budget. We were in control, and that was a tremendous experience. When you're directing an episode on a network TV show, my biggest job, my first job, is to tell the story. It's not my story. I'm directing someone else's script. And it's important that we not forget that, because it's our job to take it and break it down, figure out what the theme of the show is, despite the fact that it might have 5 or 6 storylines in it. We need to understand what that theme is so that we're constantly thinking about it when we're watching what we're experiencing. And my job is to put myself in it, but ultimately to tell what the story is. So anytime I'm deviating from the story, if I felt myself making a choice that was deviating from the story, I would wind it back. Whereas on 15 years later, I deviated from the story all the time because I was discovering other things as I was going. And that does happen on TV too, and it did happen here. But ultimately, we know the story we're telling, which is important to just sort of hone in on that as much as you can.
Also said in past interviews that one of your favorite parts of this job is the rehearsal process. How did that process differ with you in the directing chair this time around? And what was that collaboration like with the cast?
Well, it was incredible. Rehearsal is my favorite time to sort of explore and figure things out as an actor. And as a director, it's different because before you're even at that rehearsal space, you've gone over the scene 100 times. You've read the script 100 times. You've been working on it for a month at that point, right? So when you show up at the rehearsal, you have all of your thoughts and ideas and how you want it to go. But then this is the first time the actors are reading it and you're hearing it for the first time. So that's when the ideas start to come in, and you hear other people's thoughts and ideas and how that could influence the story, and maybe some things that don't pertain to the story. So it's my job to kind of mold all of this and make it make sense and give justice to the scene. So I thought that was really interesting about this rehearsal process versus the acting one. And I, of course, know these actors. We're like family. We've been working together for 5 years, so we have a shorthand, and which I think our personal relationships got put to the side a little bit because we were focused on the show and focused on the scenes that we were working on at the time, and everyone is devoted to their characters and knows their characters so well that it's cool to lean on them because they know their characters and they know what their character would do and say. So I found that to be very helpful, and I think it's really important to trust those around you and collaborate as much as you can. But ultimately, you have to make the decision to for the show and for the scene so that you can get to the end, so that you can get to your the story points, the story plots that you're trying to tell.
And there's so many impactful moments within your episode. Is there a particular scene that you're really excited for your fans to see when it drops tomorrow?
Yeah, there's so many special scenes in this episode. I think I just love this episode. I think it's so transcendent, and it's about people moving on from their past and healing from their traumas and grieving, and it's sad and emotional, but it's also sort of hopeful and uplifting and sweet and and just sort of forgiving. The center of the episode really is about this relationship between mother and son, right? Like that is, I'd say, one of the most, important formative relationships since the dawn of time. Like we all know that relationship, or have some familiarity with it. And in this story and in this episode, Billy and Trevor, their relationship is very unusual. It's very complicated. And here they both are protecting each other ultimately, right? They are making choices to protect the other person without that person knowing. And they have a rocky relationship, but at the end of it, their devotion to each other is, it's untouchable. And I think that even though their relationship is really challenging and they don't have a typical mother-son relationship, there's something about it that does resonate as mother and son. Like they're still connected, even though they have a very bad relationship at the start. And when you see this role reversal, when you see the power go into Trevor's hands and it's up to him to sort of save his mom or not, he makes a decision. And she's, of course, moved by it. And I think so. One of the most special scenes to me is when they're leaving the medical board after the medical board scene, when they're leaving and they're standing in front of the building and they're talking about what's next. Like, well, where are you going to go? What are you going to do? I mean, she says, you didn't have to do this. And he said, I did. And then they hug. And I think what's cool about that hug, and not cool, but I think what's profoundly deep about that hug is that this is the first time that these two people have ever hugged each other. Like imagine that, imagine.
Yeah.
So these two people, that it's a very like cathartic and visceral experience. And so that scene to me, it shouldn't be heavy-handed. It should be, done so in a very delicate way.
Yeah.
And I think we got it. I think that scene is really terrific, about these two people sort of ultimately trying to go into this next journey and heal themselves because they've been able to face this ugly situation that they went through. And so that scene was a very special scene to shoot. And then technically speaking, there was the challenge of the stunt at the top of the episode, which is really wild and intense. And, that was action packed. And, you see these, we wanted her to fall like 80 feet. So I storyboarded the whole sequence and we broke it down, and the producers just made the vision possible. Like they saw it. They saw a very, a very ambitious storyboard I gave, and we toned it back, of course, but then they made it happen. They helped me make this happen and figure out how to shoot on stage versus what's going to be practically, how we're going to keep the actor safe. And we did it. They built this massive exterior wall of Chastain on our stages. So we shot a lot of practical stuff on location at the High Museum, which is where we shoot. And then we shot the interior stuff on stage. And we couldn't have done that without everyone just giving their A game. Like Paul Peters built this incredible set. He's our production designer, and everyone just sort of brought their A game, and I think it really works.
When you're tackling such delicate themes, as a director, how do you create the space for the actors to play and explore those different emotions?
Mm-hmm. I think what I did, at least, was during the prep process, I kind of broke down the script and kind of made a map. And that map basically is everything you would need to know about the episode. There's like not a stone unturned, right? In my perspective. But then when you see the actors read the words and you see their experience with those words, other things happen. So when I saw, and these are some very delicate and heavy subjects that we talk about, I wanted to see their interpretation of it and see what it is that clicked with them. Where did the scenes change? Like, what are the beats that they were playing in the scene? Was it earlier than where I had imagined? Was it later than where I had imagined? Did they sit here, or did they retreat here, or did they move forward? Like all those movements, they matter so much. So the littlest things like sitting down in a chair is a big choice. to do that in a scene, right? And you cannot do it aimlessly. It has to be done with specificity. And I wanted to see what they did. And these are incredible actors on our show. Like there's no stone unturned for them either. And they have thought about it, and they've gone thought about these ideas and how to make their characters pop and shine. So it was really cool to see them play. And often our ideas came together and they matched, and sometimes they didn't. And if I thought that the way I wanted to do, where I wanted this scene to go and where the shape of the scene needed to be the way I had originally seen it, I would communicate that, and we would work on it. It would be fine. We had just such a great working relationship with all the cast. It was just so great. Everything was elevated. But always seeing what the actors first instinctually bring is very valuable to the process, I think.
Yeah, great answer. And then speaking of the cast, you shared on social media that this milestone has been decades in the making. What has it meant to you to have it come to fruition now, and to also share this moment with a cast who's become like a second family to you?
Yeah, there's no greater experience. Like, this is home, this is family for me. So to explore this this passion with the folks that have my back and support me is tremendous. Like, that's what you want, right? So I think that, for this experience, it was charmed in that way, right? I also feel like, yeah, decades in the making. I mean, I don't think there's a person out there who knows me that doesn't know that I've wanted to direct since I was young. That's something that I've always been passionate about. In addition to being an actor, directing is something that I've always loved and I've always wanted. It's something I've always studied, like, nonstop. That's something I never stopped studying. I remember, like, even when I watch a movie, it's just, I think that it just sort of lives in you when you have a passion for something. I remember I got a text message from my mom a couple weeks into directing the episode, and they were moving out of their house and selling their home. And so they had like an old bin, and it was my stuff from when I was a kid. And she opened it, and inside was like all of this director stuff that I had, like something that went on my door, and books and all this director stuff that I hadn't seen in years. But it just reminded me of that time when it was everything to me. So yeah, that's why I said decades in the making, because it really was in some ways, even though my life has been primarily as an actor, but it's definitely been something that's been part of me for a while.
How would you say your work behind the scenes has now impacted your work on camera and vice versa?
So when you're behind the camera, you see everything in a different perspective, like in a very global way. You see how A and B and C and D and E and F all connect, and how it all matters, like how scene 35 connects to scene 3, and what's important. What are the key moments in each scene that connect us to the story, that ultimately get us to the end of the story? So when you're looking at it from that perspective, like a bird's eye view of the story versus a character on camera, when you're an actor, you're thinking about the scene. You're thinking about your character and the other character. Like, how are you guys interacting? How are you going to be on with each other? How are you guys going to create some moment that's interesting and important and compelling? And I love that. I think when they come together, it's like the best combination, right? So yeah, you're looking at things very, much more globally when you're a director. And if you're an actor, I think you're thinking about, each character storyline. And that might be just a small piece or a big piece of the overall episode story. Because that's not your job as an actor. It's not to build the story. That's not your job. That's the director's job. So, our job is to do the best we can with our scene and bring truth to it, and bring the history of our character, bring the history of our relationship with the character that we're working with, and just elevating the work that we're doing on that day and in that scene. So that's the biggest difference, I think. So yeah, and then also, as a director, you're telling the story, you're building it, you're figuring out how to tell the story in a different way. Like, it doesn't say in the script, do this on the third internal moment this character has in the 35th scene. You have to bring some sort of way to differentiate all these moments. Billy's character, for example, in this episode, she has a lot of internal moments, rightfully so. She's basically going through this metamorphosis in a matter of 42 minutes. So each internal moment has to be different. They can't be the same, or she's going nowhere. So each internal moment, I have to figure out how to tell each internal moment, no words, no sound, nothing, in a way that is moving us forward. So how are they each getting bigger and more intense and getting us to that beat? So those are the things I had to ask myself and figure out and try to bring to screen. And we'll see if it worked, but I hope it did. But her character is really going through a lot, and she does so silently, in many pieces, which I think is so compelling. I think that's some of the best filmmaking, is just kind of like when you're not talking. But,
yeah, you definitely do that. By the end of the episode, I was just like completely bawling. I've got one final question for you. We're halfway through season 5. What can you tease about what's ahead for your character? And if we're lucky enough to get a season 6, could we see you stepping back into director's chair again?
Oh God, if there's a season 6, I hope so. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see if this episode works. I guess we'll know tomorrow. I think Devon is really moving into this new role as a clinician, as a doctor, a scientist, and a researcher. And I think that he believes that those principles, what he can bring, those things that he's good at, that he's passionate about, will ultimately serve medicine in the best way he knows how. So I think that this clinical research and clinical trials is kind of his next step as a doctor. And it's something that's not been reflected yet on the show. And I think it's a really huge component of medicine. So it's something we should be talking about. So I'm glad that we are. And in episode 15, you see him go on his first sort of clinical trial journey with a patient who's suffering from cancer. So that's kind of where he's going professionally and personally. I think that he really wants to settle down, and kind of in a situation with Leela's character where she's not ready to settle down. So kind of what conflict does that bring, and where does that ultimately take these two people who are both ambitious and want to succeed and do good in the world? So we have to see that conflict probably surface as well.